solely, so heavy, ripe and ready beneath the canopy.
Hello and welcome to the second in our series of webinars in the Úlla, Dúlra, agus Pobal series, which is Apples, Nature and Community of Spirala. So we're here in Cloughjordan Eco Village. We just heard a beautiful song from Maggie McEntee called The Apple Walk, with lovely art there from Ger Whelan. So the series is all about apples, and our first one was a webinar on the history of the apple in Ireland called From Mead to Pie to Pieces, Apples Then and Now. So that first one, which you can get on the website of the Eco Village, thevillage.ie, that first one featured Martin Mochanimera and Regina Sexton, both academics, writers and chefs, as well as Rod Calder-Potts, an organic apple farmer, and who, with his wife Julie, makes an amazing array of produce on their orchard in Kilkenny. And this next one, I'm going to hand over to Davy to introduce, which is more contemporary.
So welcome to episode 2, where we look at apple heritage and the local economy. We're really interested in how apple heritage could address biodiversity loss, help us reclaim food sovereignty, and revive local food economies. And that'll be our focus today, where we have Kevin Dudley, Gillian Lattimore from the Irish Seed Savers, and Trass. And I'll introduce them as we go through. We have an hour together, so thanks for being with us, whether you're online or in person, in our second of our lunchtime chats. So with us today is Kevin Dudley. He was one of the farmers on Cloughjordan Community Farm, and now is a coordinator of our community seed bank. He was the first dedicated orchard manager at Irish Seed Savers, and a position they held for over a decade. And previous to that, Kevin actually was he completed an apprenticeship in California in the University of Santa Cruz at the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems. Welcome, Kevin. It's great to have you. I'm going to start with Kevin, but we'll also have Gillian and Con that I will introduce before we bring them to questions. So a question for you, Kevin, to get us started. Why is it important to collect, protect, and grow heritage Irish apples?
Well, I thought about this, and over time, as you learn more and you see more things, your ideals change about things. So when we first started in the late 1990s at Irish Seed Savers, it was the Celtic Tiger was kicking off, and they were chopping down orchards all over the country and whatever. And really, we didn't have much to go on except Dr. Keith Lamb's PhD that he published for the Royal Dublin Society in 1951. So he'd gone around Ireland on a push bike with an ear trumpet in the late 1940s, and anywhere we had the old local agricultural advisors at that time. And so they would send him any information, and he'd go out and then he'd find these old varieties and he'd take descriptions of them. And so that's basically what we were working off of. Dr. Lamb did have actually an orchard of these old Irish varieties in what was the old Albert College in Dublin. And at some time, I think it was in the 70s, they bulldozed the whole orchard out of existence to make a car park. And this is the thing with time. Things change. Lucky enough, a lot of the varieties he'd found, he'd sent to the Brogdale Institute in North Kent in the UK, where they have over 2,000 varieties of apples there. So we managed to get some of them back but at the time there's a disease called fire blight, which is now becoming more prevalent in Ireland because of climate change, but we didn't have it at that time. So the scionwood, the bits of material that we were going to grow of these different varieties that came over, they had to go into UCD for a long quarantine before we could bring them back to Scariff and start the collection at Irish Seed Savers there. One of the things I never got to do, but nor did Dr. Lamb, was he told us a few of them were cider varieties, cider apples, but he never went into how the cooking apples were used or how they were processed or anything. So I think that's something that when we're looking at a big genetic example of a species, there's a lot of work that can be done on this. And when I was in New Zealand, I met a guy called Mark Christensen, and he'd been doing the same thing like us at Sea Savers, but people all over the world. In America, they've got the fruit and nut explorers going out to old sites and finding, because you've got to remember the trees that Dr. Lamb saw in the 1940s were already old, so they were about 80 years old, so you're going back into the 1800s. Rootstocks, which apples are grown on, were fairly rare at times, and so a lot of trees that were grown at that time were grown as seeds. They were seedlings, and so that's the potential of creating something new. And this is what Mark Christensen found down in New Zealand. Was he'd go out to these empty ranches and whatever, and there'd be these big apple trees there, and they were obviously not on the rootstock, because one of them, he couldn't even get his arms to meet around them. But we don't get that anymore. We aren't involved in that anymore. Apples are created by institutes, and there's a lot of private institutes now on the continent that create new apples, and they're copyrighted, or they have some kind of copyright on them. So we're not getting that diversity come out from people who wanted apple trees, couldn't afford them, planted pips, and ended up with a new variety. And one of the ones that Mark Christensen found was he called it Monty Surprise. And in New Zealand, in Palmerston North, which is north of Wellington, they have a Hort Science department, and Hort Science are very on the ground in New Zealand. They are the ones who helped bring kiwi fruits from China. They have feijoas, they have loads of different fruit there, which grow in New Zealand, and so they've researched that. So he went to Hort Science, and so they did nutritional profiles on every single apple in New Zealand. And this one, Monty's Surprise, came out way over the top of everything else.
Let me just ask you a little bit more about the collection, because we've got, I think, over 65 varieties in the Eco-Village from that collection. Yeah. And when we heard Maggie's song there in the introduction, that was actually her naming all of those names. And in the last episode, we went into the importance of, or how often Úlla came up in the Irish place names. Yeah. So on the collection, how many apples is there, and why was that important to collect them, to sort of to protect the heritage?
Well, yeah, that was like the Anita Hayes and Tommy Hayes had started Irish Seed Savers in Carlow, and then they moved to Scariff, and so they actually had a site to start doing this on. So it was, at the time, like I said, we were running into pull pieces of apple wood out of bonfires on building sites and things. And there was just this sense of urgency that we were losing all of this genetic diversity that was unique to here. Although the domestic apple probably came over from France back in Elizabeth I's time. And so we did that with everything. It was the first stage, which was the conservation stage. We didn't get into utilization, dissemination that much, because there was just so much to do, so few of us to do it, and none of us were really trained in horticulture to do it, kind of thing. We were just interested. So to save them because they were unique to Ireland was possibly the idea that we had for them. But when you look at them without knowing what they were used for or how they were used, I mean, we have Ecklinville seedling, which is from Northern Ireland, I think, and in the Horticultural Society in the UK, one of their big shows that they had in the 1900s, it was in the top 5 bacon apples in the world, but it doesn't travel, it bruises. But when you take it and you bake it, it's just like ice cream coming out of the skin when you bake it. So we have all this to refine. We haven't defined even the cooking varieties. So they can go from like Reine de Renette, which is the French one for tarte tatin, which the apple slices stay solid. And then the Bramley seedling, which was is just a favorite of the British, it gives you loads of sauce kind of apple, but you also get bits in it. So it's the perfect thing for pies and whatever. So we haven't done that research. Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask Seed Savers now. But when I was there, we hadn't done that research to find out where they fitted. Were they baking apples? Are they cooking apples? This kind of thing. You know?
It's interesting when you have so many varieties and heritage varieties and varieties that have acclimatized to that place. As we face more unpredictable weather, it's too hot, too cold, we have early frost or late frost, having those different varieties, does that help us build that local resilience to maybe cope with some of the shocks? There's certain varieties that might be better in cold or warm, or maybe harvest later or earlier.
Yeah, there's all those possibilities in it, and also things like apples to fruit have to have a certain amount of time below 0 in the winter. And so if we start having warmer winters, then they're going to not have this ability to go through the winter and flower properly. And then you've got flowering times. If that changes, frost might kill off a load of varieties that then are flowering later than they should be or earlier than they should be. I think the biggest, on contemplation of it, the biggest reward for the heritage varieties that we got is their genetic diversity. And to just, this is what I always say about the collection here, it's not the individuals in the collection, it's the genetics that flow between them, and it's just going to start now. The flowers are just starting now. The insects will be out, and there'll be all that flow of genetic material between the different varieties, which gives you potential then for new varieties. And this is what we need, because we've never been static. Nature doesn't stay static. It creates as much diversity as possible. And as it goes through times, the dominant things take over from, if you've got nothing there, then there's no possibility of making anything there. So out of, I think I was saying before, when we have the apple day there and that they're squeezing the apple juice out of the apples, probably once upon a time, what would have been the most profitable thing would have been the seeds that were left. And this is where Johnny Appleseed in the States came from. They couldn't get rootstocks, so they would go to the cider mill, they would collect the pulp, wash all the seeds off of them, stratify them, then you would go ahead of where the people were moving out to and plant seedlings. And so that's why they have a big diversity in America as well. That comes out of the fact that they planted seeds, not varieties.
It's interesting to see now on our apple walk in our orchards the flowering at different times. Yeah. In fact, before we introduce Gillian, maybe Darren, you could turn the camera out the window into the orchard and just get a sense of how lovely it is out there. And while we're doing that, if I could bring in Gillian, and maybe there's the scene that we're seeing just outside our window. It looks like a painting. The orchard is at the bottom there. But Gillian, can you hear me okay?
Yes, hi Davy, can you hear me?
Could we pin Gillian, Darren? So welcome Gillian. Gillian's the Communications and Development Manager with the Irish Seed Savers Association. And Irish Seed Savers have been safeguarding Ireland's food crop heritage for now and future generations, conserving Ireland's heritage apple varieties in the True Collection, managing the nation's sole seed bank, and support conservation through use, which I'm going to ask you a little bit about in a second. And Gillian's also, you're passionate about making heritage accessible to communities with a particular focus on the intangible cultural heritage and inclusive engagement. So this is wonderful, and you're very welcome, Gillian. So just to get us started, Gillian, why do heritage apple varieties matter, not just for biodiversity, but for culture and community?
Well, as Kevin alluded to there a short while ago, as you say, we all know about, I suppose, why these heritage varieties matter for biodiversity in terms of, that these rare local varieties have co-evolved with our native wildlife, and that the apple trees are home to insects, birds, bats, lichens, mosses, things like that. But in terms of culture, the these Irish heritage apple trees, they have the ability to reconnect people with our apple tree culture. And that involves the traditions, the food heritage, and also the traditional orchard skills like grafting. And like Kevin spoke of as well, like the food heritage, like what was done with these apples, what were the cookers, you know, what were the juicers, why were they planted, and why were they used? So that's how you know they matter to us in terms of how we can reconnect with the culture, but also then in terms of community. They have the ability to reconnect a community with its food source. Each of these heritage apple varieties, they have a provenance, and the provenance is throughout each county and each region in Ireland. So there's great opportunity there for a sense of connection and a sense of ownership, you know, between either community groups or individuals to reconnect with the heritage of their own region through these heritage apple trees. In terms of like councils and community groups, like they can take a holistic approach to fruit tree planting. It can bring a community together. And it's also, you know, planting a community orchard, as you guys probably know there, is it's a great resource for communities to access nature and the nutrition that the apples provide. There's a couple of good examples of this in terms of communities connected to their food sources. Like one recent one we have Irish Seed Savers have worked with is a Clare County Council pilot program called the Return to Nature Biodiversity Project, which is it's a small project about churchyards bringing their community together through the parish priest being the facilitator, and bringing in all the community to work together to enhance the biodiversity of the churchyard, let's say, and that would involve planting Irish heritage apple trees or small orchards. And like that, it continues within the community because they are encouraged to engage with the heritage by looking after the apple trees themselves, learning about the heritage of the apple tree, but also learning about the traditional skills required for the upkeep of the apple tree, whether that would be pruning, grafting, and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So actually developing some skills to look after the apples, but at the same time reconnecting to each other and to our place. This is such important work at this time where we're so fragmented or atomized, that we can put a focus on community-led orchards. And in our next episode, which will be held by Irish Seed Savers, that is exactly what we're going to look at a little bit more. Community orchards for abundance, biodiversity, and well-being. Gillian, let me ask you about what Seed Savers do, conservation through use. Could you maybe just explain that a little bit more to us? What does that mean? How does it show up? What does it look like?
Yeah, so here at Irish Seed Savers, we practice conservation through use by making the Irish National Collection of Heritage Apple Trees available to the public through retail sales. So basically how this is done, as Kevin spoke of earlier, we have the National Heritage Apple Tree Collection. At the time, it would have comprised 180 apple trees when Kevin started the process based on Dr. Lamb's thesis. And now it's continued to grow. At the time, when Kevin was here, some of the trees that Dr. Lamb mentioned in his thesis, they weren't found, but we have continued to find them over time. And one recent acquisition would be a lovely eater, a red apple called Sweet William, which was it was brought back here from the United States probably about 3 or 4 years ago. Just to come back to your question, so sorry, yes, so conservation through use. So we have all the heritage apple trees. They are conserved here in situ, on site, in orchards, and we conserve them and we protect them. But one way to ensure their protection, rather than just having an apple museum here at Irish Seed Savers, is to enable the public to grow them in their own land. So every year we select about 40 or 50 varieties of those trees, and we collect scion wood from them and we graft them onto rootstocks. And therefore we have about 40 or 50 different varieties for the public to buy and bring home to their own land, their own gardens, or communities to make their own community orchards.
We also have our Apple Walk, which the song that we heard in the introduction there goes through the different varieties. And that is a really important feature of our eco-village as we show biodiversity and heritage, that people can see those different varieties and hear from those different varieties. Let me come back to you, Kevin, with a question opening up to a theme that we spent the last weekend with Feeding Ourselves gathering, going into food sovereignty. How might conserving, protecting Irish heritage apples link to the sort of bigger story of reclaiming our food sovereignty here in Ireland?
Yeah, I think, well, I know that growing is changing. We're not going to be growing the same as we are today in the future. Orchards are monocultures, and monocultures being gradually phased out. So I think it'll be normal growers, market gardeners, and that they'll have apple varieties mixed into the whole different varieties of things that they're growing as part of their diversity. And then, like I said, if you have a really, like Mrs. Perry, if you have a really good cooking apple, like most people here would know Mrs. Perry's because it's so productive and it creates a beautiful golden puree when you cook it. So this was always a hope, would be that communities would catch hold of these varieties and start, even if they didn't come from there, would start utilizing them in their culture, in their local culture. And again, it has to come back to community being involved. And I mean, things change so fast. You know, it seemed like only yesterday that everybody cooked or made apple pies or apple crumbles or things like that. But it seems that a lot of people now don't. So you don't know where it's going. But I think, like I said before, if we could have a nutritional index of all of the different apples, because why do we eat anyway? We eat because we want to get nutrition into ourselves. So if we found a variety in the collection which had more nutrition in it, it would, like they've done in New Zealand, they put them in schools, they put them in hospitals.
Is there a way to measure that nutritional density in nothing like an apple?
Yeah, there is, but I mean, it wouldn't be up to somebody like me, it would be a lab job. Right. But Seed Savers would have the connections to be able to do that.
Well, this might be a good segue to Trass, who is in Tipperary. Con, are you here? Can you hear us? I know you were travelling. Fingers crossed you can unmute. We still can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Sorry, I thought I had myself unmuted there a moment ago.
Brilliant. Thanks, Con.
Okay,
can we spotlight Con so we can see him here on the sage? Brilliant. Sure. Welcome, Con. Oh, you're looking very smart in your car.
Yeah,
so let me introduce you. Con. Con is, runs the apple farm, which is between Cahir and Clonmel in South Tip. His family moved in the 1960s from the Netherlands, where they had been producing apples since the 1800s, so it's in your own heritage. The apple farm grows 4 acres of fruit with over 60 varieties of apples, and a ridiculous number, Con, 5 million apples produced on that 40 acres. So you've got a farm shop, it's been run from the farm since its inception, and you also supply apples, jams, jellies, brandies, and a bit like the Calder Pots who were in our first, you and them seem to be leading the way in thinking about regional-based apple farms that could do a lot more. So maybe the first question to you then is, the apple farm is a fantastic example of local food economy in action. So can you tell us a little about the story of what you do and the diversity of products?
Yeah, I suppose, like, to get to the way I'm kind of thinking about it, like, what we do shouldn't be as unique as it is, if you know what I mean. There should be plenty more people doing the same as us, but it's hopefully, you know, like the Calder Pots and Kilkenny and so on, hopefully there'll be more of us in if we're back having another meeting in 10 years' time. So we grow conventional apple varieties, so things that, you know, would be, you know, kind of known from from maybe from shops to a certain extent. So there's the likes of John Gold and Elstar as the main season eating apples. There's a Cox type apple called Carmine de Sonneville. There's Bramley cooking apples and so on. So even though we have, and it's not actually quite 60 anymore, it's probably more like 50 varieties of those. There's only 15 that we sell, and the other ones are just, specimens or small plantings because we're checking new varieties or new genetics or something like that to see what potential they have for us. But I suppose with the apples, first of all, the way my parents started was that they discovered when they started growing apples and other things that there wasn't an organized kind of way for them to market it. So they were left with little choice but to sort of set up a farm shop. And it was just by fluke that they happened to have a farm. That the farm they bought was situated beside quite a busy road, which is the Waterford Limerick Road. So that was fortunate for them. And that's what I suppose led the farm to develop in the way it did. If it wasn't for that outlet, we would have had to do something else, and we probably wouldn't be still growing fruit anymore because the very fact that we could sell direct to public meant that we were able to keep a fairer portion of the price than would have been the case with supermarkets and so on over, especially through the 1980s, 90s, and up to a few years ago. They seem to have a little bit more understanding of the complexity of getting fruit to them nowadays, but that's a very recent development.
And Liz, maybe you could just help us understand or get a sense of how you add value. So you've got a lot of other products, from lemonades to ciders to apple brandies. Give us a sense of that.
Yeah. So I suppose the very first value-added thing we did was start making apple juice, and that was in 1995, and it was in response to that really hot summer we had, and we had a heavier crop of apples than we expected or than usual. So we didn't actually have machinery for making juice, but somebody else had, and we asked them to make us 1,600 bottles, which I thought we might sell in a year, and they were gone in a month. So we got them to make another 4,000, and I thought they might sell in a year, and they were gone in about 2 months. So it was obvious then that there was pent up demand for this product that I hadn't expected. So I was reasonably young at the time, and I got a grant from Leader and was able to buy some equipment to start making juice the following year. So that was how we started into, I suppose originally our only diversification of the farm was into other crops like strawberries and raspberries and plums and cherries and so on. But then we started doing the value added side of things, and that allows you then to get more value. So we obviously sell the optimum quality fruits, but if there are ones that are too big or too small or a funny shape or anything like that, they can go for juice. So once we were making juice, we started making cider and cider vinegar. Then we started making apple jelly and strawberry jam. We don't make that, but we get it made for us. And what came after that? After this, we started making dried apple products as well with a dryer there 6 or 7 years ago. And scaled up the vinegar because the vinegar's, so most of the things we did started small and scaled over maybe a decade or so afterwards. And the most recent thing, as you mentioned, is apple brandy, which you need to make cider to begin with. So you start with cider, and we're getting that distilled, which a distillery called the Tipperary Distillery just happened to be about 3 kilometers across the fields from us. So that's a convenient way to get it distilled, and they age it then for at least 3 years, and we had the first bit of it sold there recently.
Sort of people would you be employing? Is still the family, or are you employing many?
Yeah, so I'm the only family member involved. My children so far are doing other things. So we have about 25 on the 60 acres, because the overall farm is 60 acres, of which, as you mentioned, the apples are about 40. So we have about 25 people employed full time on that piece of land. It's still the same piece of land that my parents bought in 1967. We haven't increased the size of the farm, just made it more productive in the economic sense, I suppose. Yeah.
And just tell us a little bit more about your routes to market. So you've mentioned your farm shop. Have you got other avenues or ways to sell your produce?
Yeah, with the juices and so on, we have quite a long client list of kind of, I suppose you'd say, independent cafes and that kind of thing. So they they just order from us, a few cases at a time or whatever, and we would have mostly we supply that, direct with via courier, or if it's nearby with deliveries. And then there are a few, I suppose, consolidators or wholesalers. There's one in the west of Ireland, for example, that takes it, for the Connemara area. A few places like that. So we have all sorts of different ways to get to market. With cooking apples, apples. A lot of those nowadays, as you mentioned, or as Kevin mentioned, people aren't doing so much cooking anymore. So they're going to bakeries that peel them and make apple pies. People probably eat more apple tart than ever before, but they're just not making it themselves. And then so we have various, literally almost every route to market we have tried or are still doing with some of them. So let's say Dunn Stores buy some apples from us as well for their Simply Better range of Irish eating apples, which this year ran from October till February for them, if you know what I mean.
We have a number of ways to secure connections to local food producers, like our CSA, where we pay up front, or our bread club, where at Rye Bakery we can directly support the bakery. Have you ever thought about anything like that, like a subscription, an Apple subscription to Apple Advocates?
Yes, I certainly the thought has crossed my mind quite a few times, especially when we're doing something capital heavy like planting a new orchard, for example. I often thought, well, maybe we could get people to actually, sponsor a tree or buy a tree or whatever way you want to, design that scheme, and that we would have those apples from that tree for the customer, half of the apple or whatever, you know what I mean? Something like that. It's not something I've ever done, but it's certainly crossing my mind every now and then. I suppose, again, because necessity is the mother of invention. If it was a thing that I had to come up with an alternative, what I'm doing at the moment is working okay for us. So that kind of takes the pressure off having to come up with an alternative, if you know what I mean. But it's not that I don't consider them sometimes.
So I'm going to ask you this question, then I'm going to ask Kevin and Gillian the same question. Do you think that apples, and especially these sort of apple businesses, can play a bigger role in reviving regional local food economies, which has been a big focus of what we're doing here?
Yeah, no, I absolutely think they can and they should. Obviously, you mentioned the biodiversity part earlier on as well, and that's because as an apple grower, I'm terribly reliant on biodiversity, both for pollinating insects and predators to come along and feed on my pests and so on. I probably have I have a bigger incentive than a typical farmer, maybe to make sure that there is habitat there for those insects and so on, larger mammals as well. But also in what you're talking about there with the local what Kevin is talking about, what I was talking about, is so interesting and exciting in terms of having people really want to have a specific apple for a specific purpose, something that might be located or might be related to the location, or maybe just to the heritage of the country. You know what I mean? That would be wonderful, because everything is so generic now. So all the Gala apples in the world are the same as all the other Gala apples in the world, whether they're grown in New Zealand or England or France or whatever. So that's not a good. I don't see that as even though the apple is fine, it tastes grand and all that. It's far too homogenized to my liking.
Is there a reason or a blocker or something that restricts having more Contrasses and Julie and Rod Calder pots? Why do we not see more of these sort of regional food businesses like yourselves?
Well, it's probably a little bit related to and Kevin made a very interesting point, that he thought that what we will end up seeing is market gardens who have, a huge diversity of things on offer, including the likes of apples and so on. I think he's dead right there. I think we're going to see, and we're already seeing that in the vegetable side of things, that there are more market garden operations and so on popping up. But on the other side, what's being lost is the kind of medium scale farm. So, either vegetables are being grown on absolutely huge farms, or they're being grown on relatively small market garden size operations, and the mid-sized farm is disappearing. That mid-sized farmer is becoming a large farmer, or stopping eventually. And that's to do with profitability, and profitability is probably also the reason why you haven't got so many contrasts or rod calder pots, because we are these kind of middle-sized. Our profitability, as I mentioned, is coming from being able to supply direct to consumer mostly. But if you're a mid-sized grower, you just can't suddenly stop supplying a supermarket and expect to sell everything that you have direct to consumer. That is a long, slow build. It took probably 20 years for us to build our consumer base. So you need to have another source of income or something in the meantime, I think.
In last week's Feeding Ourselves gathering, we had a contribution from a Canadian researcher on procurement, and she used the apple and the story of the apple, that she managed to get a sort of class 3 small apple, ugly apple that the consumers didn't want into hospitals. And it was amazing to see that direct procurement to a local grower of these apples led to so many other potentials and advantages as we moved into looking at the supply chain. So I'm going to ask the same question on this to Kevin and Gillian, and then I might even bring you in, Úlla, with this as well. So apples, apple heritage, apple-based businesses, how can they play a bigger role in reviving or establishing local food economies?
Yeah, well, this is one of the things we started when we started propagating the apple varieties. This is one of the selling points that we had, that it was from Waterford, Wexford, or if it was from Donegal or whatever. You had people come from all over the country, but then there was people whose mother and father was from Donegal, so they wanted a tree from Donegal. And so we sold a lot of trees because people had not a connection with the tree, but a connection with the place that they were originally found and they came from. The potential is absolutely out of this world. We have only scratched the surface of what you can do with apples. For a start, nobody talks about rootstocks. If you grow an apple tree, there was research done on it, you grow it on its own roots, it's much more disease resistant, more nutrition. The public always go for those ones to the one that was grown on its rootstock. So that's another thing to look at, because what it is in agriculture that puts the price on everything is when you have to keep buying the inputs all the time. And if you can produce your own apples without having to go out and buy the apples, or you don't have to buy the chemicals any longer to spray the apples because it doesn't need the chemicals, this would be things that I think should be looked for. And then, like all the things that Con has said, but also I've been kind of thinking about this for years. When every year, well, most years you prune the apple trees, you have masses of prunings. Those could be chipped up, dried in an area, and then used in smokers for smoking Irish cheeses or fish or whatever. They do it a lot in California. They use these smokers. So, and then the wood itself, what can the wood be used when the tree is at the end of its life? Or maybe an apple tree that doesn't produce much fruit but produces a really amazing wood that can be used for something, from instruments to anything. So really it's just getting people to think about it, and then to think about any waste that they create. How can that waste then be used?
Yeah.
You know?
It's an amazing input, because when Night Orchard started, it's a local apple pressing company, and they do catering, but when they established, they realized there were so many abandoned orchards around the place that they could almost get a free input as the core of their business.
Yeah, and I mean the seed, like I was talking about before, the one in New Zealand, there's a German company buys all the seed off of them because it has quercetin in it, I think it is, and it has a good ability at getting rid of cancer. So they buy the seeds because the seeds have this in them. So it's just looking at what it is that we've got, and we've got great thank God for Dr. Lamb, a great collection of Irish varieties of apples here. We've got all of the continental apples and that, if we wanted to get hold of them, to bring those in. And just thinking, because this is what made me think when we talk about, heritage. I thought, I know what the feeling of heritage is, but I don't really know what the word heritage means. And apparently it means to inherit. So can we consciously create heritage for the tomorrow so that they end up with more than what we ended up with? Because it wasn't a conscious heritage, it was people just trying to grow food for their families.
Let me bring Gillian in that same question, Gillian. And especially with your interest in apples being a connector or something that can help us reconnect with our place in our communities, how do you think apples and apple businesses can play a part in this local economy, which we're going to need as vulnerable long supply chains get broken? We're going to have more resilience in our local places, and stronger local food economies will play a part in that. How do you see, or what opportunities do you see in that, Gillian?
I think the opportunities like that are to reduce the reliance on imports of apples and apple products. For example, there's recent statistics out there that say that 95% of the apples that we consume in Ireland are imported, and that's a crazy statistic for a country that has the climate and the ability to successfully grow apples and has done for thousands of years. So I think we also need to accept that what these heritage varieties can offer us in terms of food security and resilience, in terms of their inherent ability for disease resistance, and also another thing that we find here in Irish Seed Savers, as I said, it comes back to our conservation through use model, that we propagate all of thousands of apple trees. Last year we propagated 11,000, and there is nowhere in Ireland or the UK that grows rootstocks. So we have to import these as well from Holland. So there's opportunities here for growth within an industry. But like that, it has to involve other players as well, like the supermarkets being willing to stock the Irish produce and willing to promote it, and for them to take proactive steps to reduce the amounts of imports that they bring in. I just wanted to come back to a point that Kevin made earlier about the culinary uses of the different varieties that we have. Since Kevin's time here, we have done research in this regard, and all of our varieties are now classed into dessert, cookers, and cider apples, following research by orchard teams here over time. And like that, we have the known uses for all of the apples now. So if anybody wanted, to say, I want a cooker from Kildare, or I want a cooker from Limerick, we could, point them in the right direction. We continue to work on this as well. Every year when we have our Taste of the Orchard tours, we would, we'd trial baking them, making kind of chutneys or jams or jellies or, this sort of thing, and kind of finding out, like one that we trialed last year was a particular variety. And like that, we realized you didn't need any sugar in the apple to make an apple tart, that the apple was so sweet itself. So, and now we've added this into the information about that particular variety, so it's an ongoing process. But I think if people become more aware of these apples, and also I think a part of it as well is promoting the genetic diversity of these apples. Like the apples that we consume in the supermarkets are monocultures. There's a gala and there's a pink lady, and they taste the same everywhere and they look the same everywhere. But something that these heritage varieties can offer us is contained within their genetic diversity. There will be so many different taste profiles and texture profiles and color profiles, that their culinary capabilities are just amazing, So I think this needs to be promoted and explored as well.
So it sounds like we need more apple literacy, that we need more education to the public of citizens in understanding the importance of the heritage, the diversity, and also the usage. As you say, the supermarkets offer us a red apple, a green apple. It's a good-looking apple. If anything looks a little bruised, we don't want to know it. So that idea, like you do at Seed Savers, of really building our awareness, our understanding and knowledge of the apple. Ollie, I'm going to ask you the same question because we've just come out of this 4-day gathering, the Food Sovereignty Conference, Feeding Ourselves. So how do you see apple businesses playing a part in strengthening our local economies, local food economies?
Yeah, I suppose it works on so many levels, because one of the reasons we even have an apple festival here is because of the guilt we felt about all the apples in the ground. But that came from putting in all the apple trees and having these apples and just thinking, what are we going to do with all these apples? You know, walking to the shop past all the apples on the ground to buy food kind of seems ridiculous on one level, you know? So, but now, like, we have these Miss Perry's here dried from last year. And I mean, I think, Kevin, is it like this was just one garden in Donegal or something? It was like, it was precarious enough to bring this back, and now it's everywhere here. This particular...
Yeah, a Scottish woman in Donegal town called Mrs. Perry, her daughter had an apple. We don't know what it was, but that was off of the seed of the apple.
Yeah.
And it's a compact spur variety, and it roots on its own roots.
Yeah, and like it produces enormous apples.
It does, yeah.
Like it's not necessarily the best one for drying, but for quantity it is like.
Yeah, it's fairly self-fertile as well. I've tried to stop it pollinating and it won't.
Yeah. So like you've got this kind of culture of abundance now that we've kind of landed upon ourselves. And capitalism is about the creation of a false sense of scarcity. And like you can end up having way too much food if we allow ourselves to, if we build it into our landscape, you know. But that's that level. But then if you go up another level, I mean, look at what Con is doing there in terms of 5 million apples and dozens of people employed on what's like an average size farm. And then so careful about, because I know Con, and he's so careful about biodiversity and pollinators, and to actually have all of that going on as well, it's a cruelty-free farm, as amongst many other things. And it's so beneficial to the community. Like there should be cons in every county. We could have a North Tip con and a South Tip con, you know? But like public procurement as well, what you mentioned is so interesting. That example from Canada, it was like a 4-bite apple that made sense for people with, you know, dentures and stuff. Like they wanted to make it hospital friendly. So they figured out an apple that made sense in that context. And public procurement gives growers certainty. Yeah. You've got a market that you can rely on, you can borrow, you can plant, you can do the things based on that. We slightly improved our procurement policies recently, but we need to keep working on that.
I think that just to capture that, the idea of procurement now means that you're just looking for price. So there's no encouragement for local procurement or green procurement, which we need a lot more of.
There's a tiny bit, it's slightly better than it used to be, because there's a 10% organic now written into the procurement rules. But we need social procurement. We need to build in social benefits into procurement systems, and for that to be integrated into the community around the institutions that are doing the procurement. And work like that is starting to happen.
And especially when you look to Scotland, or what we saw from Cleveland and Preston, the work of community wealth building, which at the core of it is establishing more Contrasties and Calderpots type enterprises, but making sure that the procurement and the spend of the big users in that place, the hospital, the local authority offices, aren't just procuring their produce from thousands of miles away, that it keeps the wealth circulating in the local place and builds that community wealth.
Yeah, so like the bio-district idea that's developing around Limerick and the counties around Limerick, it shows lots of promise for that as well, because there's a chicken and egg thing sometimes with, you need to map the capacity for institutions to take in the good foods to help growers have certainty about what to supply. But having the right people involved at the start to make sure that it's as locally embedded as possible, because that we need to be, with all the kind of trade wars, tariff wars, supply chain shocks, even just this week, so many of those things landed so heavily and so scarily in terms of like the reports coming out from the UK about supply chain risks and the craziness around tariffs. But like trees last a while. You can have them in your community for many, many years, and you can keep building them into your community in more robust ways. So the potential for us to have this culturally integrated, what would technically be an economic asset that feeds you and tells you about yourself. I mean, it's such a positive. There's so many positives to building sort of an apple-based resilience, and lots of other foods too, but apple has such a strong core in it to help tell that story.
It was interesting in the first episode when you were talking to the historians on apples and the place. It was such a big feature of a place and celebrated in the place.
Place names, like so many place names in Ireland coming from apple trees. And just, I mean, I'm slightly obsessed with this figure now, this idea of, in the Brehon laws, like one apple tree being worth 5 dairy cows. Just that kind of intergenerational wealth that's kind of associated with apples in some contexts, like, and just how value has shifted and turned so much. It was like, don't mess with an apple tree. That's so many years of wealth you're talking about there. So like we the worst thing that will happen, I suppose, is that we'll have loads more things to do, like with apples. There's so many things, like the circular economy, even in terms of, animal feed, all kinds of things can come in with sort of the residues, from juicing apples and,
The best place I've ever been to was the Southern Fruit Research Station of Germany at Pillnitz, outside of Dresden. There was a guy who was in charge then called Manfred Fischer, and he was just gregarious with the material they had in the collection. And I remember it was a hilly area, and we were driving through it, and all of the hills, all of the farms, all had different fruit trees in flower, because this man had kind of sent them out into the local area. So it's just like the collection that you've got here now. Can you imagine that everywhere? It's not that hard. You need a couple of people who are prepared to do the pruning or whatever, or you do it as a collective or whatever, but it's easy enough. But like you say, I don't think, it's like our priorities in life have changed. I used to think, well, if you had mobile phones there instead of apples, they'd steal the mobile phones, but I don't think they'd even do that any longer. Because when I was kids, they would put glass on the top of walls to stop you stealing the apples.
Yeah.
And
do kids still steal apples?
I don't think they do.
Let me ask each of our contributors for some last words as we come to the end of our second episode. And let's stay with the topic of apple heritage and the local economy. Any last thoughts on that topic? Let's start with you, Con. Hopefully you're still with us in your car. Any last thoughts on apple heritage and local economy you might share? He's gone. Can I ask then you, Gillian, any last thoughts to share on apple heritage and the local economy?
Yeah, I think a final kind of closing word is that, communities engaging with their apple heritage, it can instill a sense of pride, which can then continue it on through generations, apple heritage, it's an intergenerational thing. It doesn't just have to be for the generation that's here now. It can be a grandfather, an uncle, a mother, sharing their knowledge of, the traditional apple varieties or the traditional apple skills with the children of now, so that they can then pass it on again, so that these traditions and this culture continues. But I think another way that it has the potential is, given that, we're in a climate crisis, and the potential for, orchards to contribute to climate change through, fostering and enhancing biodiversity, maybe, within urban centres as well. So there's a huge potential for communities to engage with apple heritage, and also like that for us, for Ireland to, look at sustainable ways in, I suppose, feeding ourselves with apples that we grow ourselves. It seems unbelievable that we don't do this anymore. And so hopefully maybe, webinars like this might inspire people to do a little bit and be a little bit more proactive about apples in the community.
And that was a live shot you just saw there of Tom in our community orchards just doing some work.
Yeah,
Also,
and he's there all the time.
He's
Like,
a-
fair play to Tom Tracy. Like that wasn't like a setup. That was just because he was there, and he's always there, and he's like a food hero in a very quiet way.
and one of the things to capture there on the sort of community engagement, Gillian, is I've seen a lot of community orchards or community gardens bringing in teenagers, especially young males, and getting them to plant and care for their apple trees. And it just makes a huge difference in the impact of antisocial behaviour in the place, and brings in that sort of vulnerable community, especially young men, into the wider community. So I think there's a lot of potential building that community, sense of place, a deeper sense and respect for the heritage and the plants of the place. So Kevin, the same to you. Any last words on apple heritage and the local economy?
I think it's just like what you've been saying, it's exposure, because not everybody is going to be. We need diversity within ourselves as well as within our crops and in the ecosystems that we have to create to live in and manage in a better way than we have been. And so there'll be some that will be into apples. I've met them all over the place and all over the world. But then you need other people as well with the ideas, because not always the person who's interested in propagating apples and growing apples is the one who wants to pick them and make things out of them. They just like growing the apples and maybe eating a few of them. And that thing of young people, ownership. Our friend Dave Breslin's been all over the country for years now planting self-rooting trees, and he's been up in the States, up in Belfast and whatever, and giving these young guys, this is your apple tree. When it's your apple tree, they look after their apple trees. They don't go swinging in the tree or use it, hit a football into it or whatever. So it's just trying to create this ownership again. And also that then connects back into community, with communities having ownership of over orchards or apple trees and all coming together to divide it or create new ways of adding value to it and whatever.
And as we're protecting that natural capital, we're building social capital.
Yeah, and also it brings us into nature. If you're not used to being into nature, now you've got an apple tree you've got to look after, and what's that insect on there, and why is that leaf gone, or like that, and then, what's that that's growing next to it? It widens your awareness to everything, and it's probably a lot healthier than staring at a computer screen.
Any last thoughts, Ollie, on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, even these apple pieces, young people love them. They can compete with sweets, like with jellies. And if you're, picking and peeling and drying, then you're more likely to eat as well. So there's so many levels to that.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us today, especially Gillian, Con and Kevin. And myself and Ollie were delighted to host that. We have 2 more of these sessions. The next one is on the 9th of May, which will be held by Irish Seed Savers, Community Orchards for Abundance, Biodiversity and Wellbeing. And then on the 23rd of May, our final episode is From Orchard to Action, Art, Ecology and Climate Resilience, really looking at how art and creativity can engage us in these themes directly.
And also the Apple Festival.
The Apple Festival is September the 20th. It's a fantastic day to get a taste of Clough-Jordan Eco-Village. Bring your own apples to press, or come and press our apples. But there's also a lot of other events, stalls, and activities. And that is where we're going to be launching a new Apple advocacy booklet, which these 4 episodes are working towards. So, thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you in the next episode. Enjoy the weather.
Breezy, Pippin, Dockney, Honey Bowl, Summer John, Gibbons, Russet, April Queen, 8 Square, Lady Suddenly, under the golden canopy. Ooh. crickets sing, and on the blossom flower, on to autumn bring the apple down wonder. Hear the blackbird sing of the golden spire and the April queen. Ooh. Honey, peach, and golden, hear them sweetly fall. Oh, there's the bloody butcher in among them all. Sam Young has fallen for the sweet granola lee, so heavy, ripe, and ready beneath the canopy. Ooh, take the apple walk, gather from the ground. The breeze has blown them down, you'll find them all around. Some are bruised, some are smooth, some won't let go at all.